Sure.
Cool.
Okay, I'm gonna go.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's been a crazy week in the Hobbs home this week, I tell you. We have, my in-laws are coming in town tonight. So we're trying to get the house ready, finishing the decorations, right, that we've been postponing for 4 months. And we picked them up today. We dropped them off on Friday, and at the same airport, we pick up another friend and drop her off on Sunday.
It's gonna be a full weekend at the
Full
house.
weekend.
Full weekend.
Full week at the Hobbs house.
We'll be hard to drop back.
So as you all know, last time we lifted up a few people in prayer, and it's just, I think, an encouragement for us to know that prayer does work. Mr. Franchi is doing well. He was at church on Sunday. I saw him. We shook hands. Miss Paula, her father did pass, and so she was out of the office last week, but she's there again in the office, and she found some encouragement from God. I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this, but one of her symbols of her parents is a red cardinal. And so while she was, some of you all may have heard the story, but while she was work in the garden, she saw a red cardinal. And then a few days later, she saw 2 red cardinals. And so that was God's encouragement to her that your parents are united, which is her prayer.
Hey, I forgot to say, Mom is back.
Mine
We prayed for Mom last week.
We prayed
Mom had successful surgery, right? Very good, successful surgery. I feel great that he's back.
Yeah, I didn't see him back there.
He's hiding. He's usually over there. He's like holding us off. He's trying to like shake us up a little bit.
So we see that prayers are answered and God does move in those ways. Before we begin, I do have one announcement I think many of you all will be very excited about. In our study of Judges, we've been going over the geography of the land, and we've been talking about different places, Shechem, the 2 mountains, etc. And some of you have shown interest in wanting to go to the Holy Land. And so I'm excited to announce to you that Miss Linda, myself, and Chantel will be leading a trip to the Holy Land for the church. We're looking at March 2020 to be the time that we go. So next spring. I'm still working with Jerusalem University College, to get everything squared away with final dates and the travel guide that we'll have. But we're moving forward in that direction. So you should be hearing something soon about information meetings, prices, and more information to come. But I think it's exciting. All right. So last week we did not finish the study on the minor judges. We ended or concluded with Jephthah and the sacrifice of his daughter. And so as we start this morning, just to take a poll, would you like to visit the previous material and finish kind of Jephthah's fight against Ephraim and the minor judges, or do you want to kind of jump straight into the Samson and his first love?
Jump.
Jump?
Jump.
Let's jump. All right, let's jump then. We're going to leave Jephthah alone. And the minor judges, because they're minor, right? Okay, so this morning we were to read Judges 13 through 14, which is the birth story of Samson, as well as kind of this first narration of his wedding. If you're like me growing up, all I heard about was Samson and Delilah. That's all I heard about, Samson and Delilah. His hair grew long, and she got him to cut it, and then he was blinded and made to work in the temple and tore it down. We sometimes don't hear about this first analog or this first story of Samson. And it's interesting, as we'll go through it, you'll see that the author never gives her a name.
Yeah.
If you remember reading it, he always refers to her as Manoah's wife, Samson's mother, her, or she, all these pronouns, but never does actually name her.
I get so confused. What tribe was Samson from?
Samson was from the tribe of Dan. Samson was from the tribe of Dan. Now, it's interesting, as you brought up that good question, because when you look at your map, even though, let's see, where's Dan on here? There we go. Dan originally was down here, right? Because what area was he from? It's escaping me. It was not Timnah, but he was from Zorah. Yeah, he was from Zorah. And so Zorah is located right here in this region. And so the Philistines were seaward people, which is what Wiersbe brings out. They kind of came from the Greece area, etc. And so they came and they settled pretty much on the coastal part. And what happened is you'll see a relocation of much of Dan because they'll relocate or migrate from here to up to the north. And so Samson is actually from this area. And so we get a new tribe in this story. We've looked at the tribe of Naphtali, Manasseh, Issachar, Ephraim, as well as Benjamin and Judah. And so now we kind of get one of the smaller tribes in Dan. So, let's see. We can just jump straight into it, man. Straight into it. The Bible tells us one of the very first things that happen is what? Verse 1. What's the first thing the author reminds us or wants us to know?
Again, the children did evil.
Again, the children did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So, in the whole story of Jephthah, or let's see. Let me make sure I'm not. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So, we begin again the cycle. The cycle is starting again. And so it says, again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Notice the oppression is growing longer and longer. And so what he says is, let's see here. Y'all, it's been a crazy morning.
Okay.
All right. So the Philistines were the seaward people. And they actually existed from around this time with Samson and a little bit of Jephthah, because remember the Philistines were introduced during Jephthah's story. They stayed there until about the conquest of David. Because remember David's big enemy, Goliath, right? The Philistine. And remember he was in war oftentimes, him and Saul, with the Philistine army. And David actually went to fight for the Philistines as he began to fight against Saul because of their little, disagreement there, to say the least. And so then what happens is, it says, a certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was childless. So already from the very beginning, we get to learn about the father, his name, and his clan. But all we learn about the wife is she's unnamed and childless. And so she's unable to give birth. And the angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, you are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, dedicated to God from the womb. And he would take lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Now, does anybody know what a Nazarite is? Anybody want to take a wild guess?
Somebody from Nazareth?
Somebody from Nazareth? No. So there, it does seem the same. I thought the same thing when I was studying it earlier. I thought there was a correlation between the town Nazareth and the person, a Nazarite, but they're two different words in Hebrew. And so Nazareth, of course, refers to the place or to the people group, but Nazarite actually refers to someone who is dedicated to God, somebody who actually dedicates their life to God. And we see that in Numbers 6:1-8. This is what it says. The Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or woman wants to make a special vow, a vow of dedication to the Lord as a Nazarite, they must abstain from wine and other fermented drink, must not drink vinegar made from wine or other fermented drink. They must not drink grape juice or eat grapes or raisins. I don't know what the deal is against grapes. And as long as they remain under the Nazarite vow, they must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, not even the seeds or skins. So don't go near grapes at all. During the entire period of the Nazarite vow, no razor may be used on their head. They must be holy until the ending of their vow, and they must let their hair grow long. And throughout their period of their dedication to God, they must not go near a dead body. Even if their father or mother or brother or sister dies, they must not make themselves ceremonially unclean on account of them. And so, yes, sir.
But typically that vow is always for maybe a couple of years or something like that.
Right, right. And that's what's unique about Samson's story. You're absolutely right. The Nazarite vow was not typically for a lifetime. It was typically for a set period of time, or agreed upon time between the person and God, etc. But here in Samson's story, we will see that it's actually his entire life. And so another thing that happens is not only was Samson to be a Nazarite, but his mother in her pregnancy was to do so as well. So what does it say about the role of a mother in this scene?
Well, she's protecting her unborn child
Mm-hmm.
from the bad stuff, the grapes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
Well,
Anybody
like
else?
even today, they tell women they're expecting, no smoking, no drinking, no drugs, and eat certain fruits and vegetables and
Mhm.
meats. So she's following these laws to make sure she has a healthy baby.
Right.
I think it was a little deeper.
Okay.
I think it was a little deeper that the mother was gonna be leading him into what he was supposed to be.
Okay.
I think that was more what her job was,
Okay.
besides just refraining from wine.
Right.
She was also the one who was gonna be telling him what it was all about and how to live.
So it's sort of like she had to experience it to begin to lead by example. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Not to be political, but it is, his life was dedicated to being one of these. Life begins in the womb. So
Mm-hmm.
it would have to necessarily start before he was actually born.
That's pretty true. That's pretty true. I almost want to argue that view that life begins in the womb may actually be very biblical to the Hebrews, because when you read in Jeremiah chapter 1, where he says, "While I was in my father's womb, you knew me," around about verse 6. And then I think it's Psalm 139, where it says, "You knew my inward parts while I was kept secret or hidden from the world in my mother." So this idea of life in the womb is a part of the Hebrew culture, I would almost want to argue. And so it could be the case that if life did begin in the womb, as Mr. James was saying, then we should start the preparation there and not when it's born. Yes?
I agree with what all three have said, is everything that you take in as a mother,
Mhm.
everything you take in
Mhm.
directly affects your child.
Right.
That you're carrying. And as far as what you're eating, what you're drinking, and then your activity and what you're doing, and I think also stress and mindset. And so I think once she found out she was pregnant, she was barren.
Right.
And once she found out she was pregnant, it was like this inner joy in doing whatever God asked her to do, because she felt there was such an importance to this child that she was carrying.
Right.
And so I think that is, it gave validity to what the angel had told her, and
Right.
said, this child will be different. And I think, there was just such a, she had a unique opportunity. As a mom, you have this child, you carry this child inside you, and you have this bond with this child.
Right.
And then again, she'll be the one that teaches him,
Mm-hmm.
as in by example.
Right.
This is what I've done for you. So,
Yeah, I think all three of those points are very valid, for sure. Even today in our culture, we recognize the importance of a woman's health, or a mother's health, as well as her diet, and the forming of the baby. I mean, for instance, if a mother is dependent upon alcohol during that time, it affects the child. If she doesn't get enough folic acid, it affects the child. If she uses drugs, etc., it affects the child. If she is very stressed, right, it affects the child. I'm not a mom, I won't ever be one, but I've heard the stories, right?
Probably good.
Right. But then also, it could be the case that, you know, she is taking these vows herself to begin to experience it so that she can prepare the child for doing it as well. So that she knows what, you know, the household should be like, or where they should live, or where they should live, etc. And then it also could be that it itself is preparing the child for what it's doing. Another thing that's interesting in the text, if you look at verse 5, is that it says, okay, you will become pregnant, you will have a son, okay, the whole hair part. But then the author says the child is to be dedicated to God from the womb. So his Nazirite vow starts in the womb. And that's what the author wants us to be aware of. And so in the womb, he has to be living out that vow. But also he would take lead in delivering Israel. And that's interesting because in all of the other judges, there hasn't been this long period of waiting, in the sense of once the deliverer is acknowledged, now we have to wait 25 years for them to grow up and to deliver Israel. And so it's almost like God here is making them be patient, because he's saying, okay, this is the promised one to deliver us and take the lead, but we got to wait a while. You know, with Gideon, it was when the angel came, it was immediate. You know, a little bit of the same with Jephthah. When the enemy came and he was in hiding, they immediately sent a counsel to get him, and all these other things. And so this is something that's quite unique to this story. But then the woman went to her husband in verse 6 and told him, a man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God, very awesome. I didn't ask him where he came from, and he didn't tell me his name, but he said to me, you will become pregnant and have a son. Now drink no wine or fermented drink. Do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazirite of God from the womb until the day of his death. So notice, even though the woman is unnamed, the angel visited her first, and then she went back to tell her husband, and the way she describes it is to say, okay, well, there was a man of God who came to me. He looked like an angel. So she identifies that this is a messenger of God. This is probably an angel of God. His appearance was very awesome. It was wonderful. It was magnificent. It was something I can't really begin to describe. He didn't tell me his name nor where he came from. And this will be interesting for us to point out, because in the next time the angel shows up, in all of this, the father only wants to know about where he came from and what his name was.
He didn't believe her, did he?
I don't know. We could ask that question a little later. Because in verse 8, we will kind of see more of that. But notice also in this text, what is something that she leaves out in her report to the husband? Is there anything that she leaves out?
The hair.
She leaves out the hair, right? You'll drink no wine. He will not eat anything unclean, because he's a Nazirite from God. So why do you think she let out the hair, or the author purposely kept out that part of her story? Yes, sir.
Well, I'm not sure it's really that important. If she says a Nazirite,
Mm-hmm.
the father should know what a Nazirite means.
Yeah.
Right. You're right.
And that would be part of the deal.
Probably so. Probably so. Yes, ma'am.
But then you said too that when they were Nazarite, it was only for a certain term period, so maybe it was time to cut his hair, he would be out of that time period. I don't know.
That could be a point. That could be a point. Because it also could be, well, I don't know if I can argue this, but maybe she wanted to end the vow early by not mentioning the hair. It could be in there. Yes, sir.
Can you give us an estimate of the difference in time between Samson and King Saul, the first king?
Let's see if I could do that.
Samson was the last judge, right?
Correct.
And
Correct.
Judges ended when King Saul
Mm-hmm.
took place.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. If I would give you a rough estimate, I would think somewhere between 100 to 150 years. Because, and the reason I say that is you have Samuel, who technically is the last judge, but in the book of Judges, Samson is the last one mentioned. You have Samson, you have a few others mentioned in 1 Samuel, and then you have Samuel himself, and then you have Saul. Because remember, Samuel was an old man when Saul was coronated as king. And so I think about maybe, I say 75 years, maybe 200. But what else is left out in this story? There's something else that she leaves out. So if you look at what the angel tells her, you are barren and childless. You'll give birth to a son. Verse 4, see, doesn't drink wine or fermented drink, eat anything unclean. You'll be pregnant, have a son, don't cut his hair. He's a Nazarite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take lead in delivering Israel. And then she reports to her husband in verse 7, he said to me, the angel, drink no wine, don't eat anything unclean. She forgets the hair part, and she ends it by saying, the boy will be a Nazarite of God from the womb until the day of his death.
Well,
Yes,
why
sir.
is it important what she didn't tell her husband? Why is that important?
That's important because when you see omissions in the text, it clues us into something that the author is trying to communicate. And sometimes it can mean something, and sometimes it doesn't.
Was she downplaying that he was going to be the Philistines, or
He was gonna save Israel.
that she
Right.
would be, that he would be, did she have like afraid to say that out loud?
I'm not sure, but I think it's interesting, right, that she leaves out the part about him defeating defeating the Philistines. Because that's the part she leaves out. He would lead Israel from the hands of the Philistines.
Which would make him an easy target when he lived, if you say that.
Right. It could be. It could be. Yes, sir.
It also says he will begin to save Israel from the Philistines. That's
Mhm.
what he will do it, he'll begin to do it.
Right. Right. So when we're reading scripture, these are important questions because sometimes when you ask, as I said, what's omitted or what's not present that should be, it could lead you to discovering something more. And then, for instance, in the story of John the Baptist and Jesus, when John the Baptist asked him, are you the Messiah to come? And his response to him is a quote from Isaiah. Jesus omits a certain part of Isaiah that talks about freeing the captives. And so because Jesus does that, scholars believe John the Baptist knew that, okay, he is the Messiah, but he's not going to free me from prison. And they know that because the omission of the Isaiah passage. And then also another thing that I learned is when you look at Luke 4, which talks about the mission of Jesus, he goes to his town in Nazareth. He enters into the synagogue, and he sits down and begins to teach them. He rolls out the scroll of Isaiah, and he reads certain things. He said, I've come to profess good news to the poor, to set the captives free, and to profess the year of the Lord's jubilee, or the year of the Lord's favor. The thing that he leaves out is the day of judgment or reckoning. And it's interesting that he does that because what some scholars believe is Jesus in that time period was saying, my ministry is to bring health to those who are sick, to really alleviate the oppressed and the poor, and not necessarily that whole judgment piece, because that comes later in the second coming. And so when we're reading scripture, it's important to ask those questions of what's missing, what's not there. Sometimes in the book of Judges, as we see, it might not be anything. And then sometimes, as we see in other passages, it can mean a whole lot more. Does that make sense? And so after she says all these things, she brings up a different point as well than what the author wrote the angel communicated to her. She asked the story that he will be a Nazareth of God from the womb until death. So from the time he's conceived all the way until the time he leaves this world. And so then Manoah, being a great husband, right, prays to God. And he says, pardon your servant, Lord. I beg you to let the man of God you sent to us come again to teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born. He says, I want to know, God, can you let the angel come again, or the man of God? Notice he doesn't call him an angel. He says the man of God, so that we can learn how to raise up our child. it's interesting in this because the angel kind of already told him what to do, right? The angel already told him, all right, grapes are off limit. He's allergic to grapes, right? Raisins are not okay either. Cranberries, we can talk about it. But no grapes, no unclean food, you know the law, the Levitical law. And then also, don't cut off his hair. But here again, the father is saying, can you come to me in order to help me understand how to raise a child? And so one of the things that Wiersbe points out is that the claims of God were upon this child, and it was the obligation of the parents to train him for the work of God sent to him. So
That didn't happen.
sir,
The man of God didn't come back.
Yes.
Yeah, he did.
he did.
He just didn't let it know his name.
Yeah, he just didn't let him know his name. Yeah, the man of God came back. And so we can continue the story because he says then, let's see, God heard Manoah in verse 9, and the angel of God came again to the woman, again she's unnamed, while she was out in the field, while she was doing her work, but her husband was not with her. And so then the woman hurried to tell her husband, he's here, the man who appeared to me the other day. So she sees the angel, and then she just leaves and gives her husband, right? But notice the angel actually waits for her.
Yeah.
Just like the angel waited on Gideon, right? And so Manoah got up and followed his wife, and when he came to the man, he said, are you the man who talked to my wife? I am, he said. So Manoah asked him, when your words are fulfilled, what is to be the rule that governs the boy's life and work? Isn't it interesting here that there are two things? He says, when your words are fulfilled. So there's no doubt about what's going to happen concerning this boy's life. It's not a question of faith, but he also asks this legalistic kind of question because he says, what's the rule that governs the boy's life? Why is he asking this again when his wife has already told him what's the rule to follow? It's the Nazarite rule, right? She's communicated specifically what he is to do, right? Doesn't that get on your nerves sometimes, wives? Right? You tell your husband once and he doesn't listen.
Yeah.
I'm a victim of that.
Well, why did the husband not believe her?
Right.
I mean, she's told him twice about this,
Right.
and he just keeps wanting the proof. I don't understand.
Yeah.
I can't because of that.
So why do you think, this is a good question, right? Why do you think it took the woman, why do you think the man didn't believe the woman the second time?
He believed her, he just was checking to make sure she got it right.
That's a good
Hey,
answer.
that's a blessing.
I think it's history.
It's a man's son.
Adam believed Eve.
Right.
Yeah.
Just a man.
Oh, I didn't tell Eve
He
not
paid for
to,
it.
he told Adam not to. Oh, Adam's job all along, he's like,
I'm not
Anyway, carry on.
But it is, you know, it's humorous to us because it's the same thing that happens today, right? I mean, I'm a victim of it too. We hear something as men, our wives tell us, at least is my perspective, and we say, yeah, babe, yeah, for sure.
My wife tells me something to do, I say, okay, and I hope she forgets about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Just say, okay, yeah.
It's called selective hearing.
It is selective hearing because, again, let's see. Notice the question, right? The question he asks is, when your words are fulfilled, what is to be the rule that governs the boy's life and work? Right? He asks that question. He doesn't care about the man's name. He doesn't care about his clan right now. His wife has already told him this. And so what we see in this character of Manoah is he's just not listening to his wife. He's just really not.
But apparently he recognized that this person was an angel
Mhm.
or a spokesperson of God.
He doesn't actually, because it's not until later that he recognizes it.
Maybe he was
And then
the
it's
next
part.
part. Like, what do I do as a father? Again,
Right. It could
How
be.
am I supposed to help?
Yeah, that could be.
Maybe he's just excited. The missing something she was writing the first time, he went about 3 more tests, so I mean.
Wow.
Definitely right down in communication.
Yes, ma'am, so.
I just wonder also, you know, usually, like, okay, when Hannah finds out she's pregnant, they say, go name your child Samuel.
Right,
But this David does not tell them what to name this child.
right,
It's just kind of, I think it's just kind of different, because like when the angel visits Mary, maybe you're gonna name this child. You have to think, okay, it's just kind of weird that part of it is not,
right,
not part of this, because usually the name has everything to do with it, because the name has meaning.
right,
Now,
right,
Samson means sunny, I don't get that one, but I don't understand where that came from.
right.
Because, you know, it's just a different name, but I think this is kind of, I was waiting for the angel to say.
Right, right.
If you will name this child Samson, meaning
Right.
mighty warrior, or, you know, man would go up and pick one.
Yeah, yeah.
Girl, it's right,
Right.
not reason.
Names are important, because remember what Abimelech's name meant. My father's the king.
Yes.
And so he had a name that meant something. Yes, ma'am.
Well, the next 13 says, and 14, I just wonder if this has something to do with how her husband responded. The angel of the Lord answered, your wife must do all I have told her, and then it goes on at the bottom, she must do everything I have commanded her. So she's under the purview of the angel and God,
Mm-hmm.
and he's real emphatic about it.
Right.
She's got to listen to me, and maybe not you.
Mm. That's a good point. That's a really good point, because
That was it.
that's exactly what the angel says. So as she was mentioning, the angel is, even in response to the father's question, the angel again directs it back to the wife and says, your wife must do all that I have told her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, drink any wine, go near grapes, whatever, eat anything unclean, and she must do everything I have commanded her. That's all that he tells them. So he kind of repeats himself almost in a sense, but it's not any obligation given towards the father directly. Maybe indirectly because it's the father, but still it's on the wife and on the mother.
Maybe the father's supposed to enforce that.
It could be. It could be that the father was to enforce that. Or it honestly could be that the angel is just, again, reminding him, I've said what I said. You know, I've already told you this. But then, you know, Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, we would like you to stay until we prepare a young goat for you. This is the same type of thing that Gideon did, right? So after he got all the stuff and he said, okay, I'm happy with what you told me. The conversation's ended. Now let me go get you a goat. And so the angel of the Lord replied, even though you detain me, I will not eat any of your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord. Does your Bible have in parentheses, Manoah did not realize that it was the angel of the Lord?
Yes.
What are we to make of parentheses in Scripture?
Somebody noticed that wasn't there.
Say that again.
Somebody noticed that there was some information that wasn't there.
Somebody knows that some information wasn't there. That's going to be a good one. Anybody else want to offer why we have parentheses?
Well, for further explanation, as far as me, I'm concerned.
Yeah. So sometimes in Scripture, what happens is the original text was not made on a computer, printed, and then scanned and copied for all of the people, right? It was handwritten on particular paper that could decompose after many years. And what some scribes would do is that their whole duty in life as a scribe was to copy certain manuscripts and notes. And so because of that, sometimes what you will see, especially in the Greek, is that in these parentheses, the editor may be adding a particular editorial note or adding information to the text that manuscript forgot because they're looking at a previous manuscript.
Could it have been the translator added that?
It could be that the translator added it as well. The best way to know is to have the original text before us, because when you see the original text in Hebrew or Greek, you will see the language written down, and then in the margins, you'll see little edits that have been made or notes that have been made. And so what could be happening is the scribe that was translating this in the Hebrew from one Hebrew text to another Hebrew text to give to others could have said, you know what, you forgot to add this part here. And so it goes, and the reason these edits are made is to enhance the text, not to change the text. And so Scripture is still authoritative, you know, despite all that, and it's still the inspired word of God. But we do see some human interactions here in the text as well. And so what happens is the author or the editor wants us to know that Manoah did not realize that it was the angel of the Lord, even though, again, his wife told him that before, right? He looked like the angel of God. He was so amazing and awesome. And so Manoah inquired of the angel of the Lord, what is your name, so that we may honor you when your word comes true?
Right.
So Manoah wanted to actually bless the man. 9 months later, when the child was born, and she goes from being barren to now having a child, he wants to, of course, have his name so he can know what tribe and what his location is. But then the angel replied, why do you ask our name? It is beyond understanding. It is beyond understanding. And so it's interesting here because this beyond understanding reverts back to what we were talking about earlier, in that names actually have meaning and power. And so just to kind of illustrate this a little bit more, let's see. A question for us is, what names do we typically apply to God, to like our God, Yahweh? What are some names? Father?
Father,
Okay.
Creator,
Creator?
Counselor,
Counselor? Almighty?
Almighty,
Mhm.
Powerful,
Powerful? Friend is another one, right?
Savior.
Teacher? We say Savior. Mhm.
Lord Jesus, be with
Chief priest, high priest, intercessor,
Healer,
healer, all these sorts of things. And so, as the commentator, this older commentator, was saying, the name is regarded as the embodiment of the personality. And therefore, when the angel responds, it's beyond your understanding. It's because the angel himself was beyond understanding. So if my name is holy, right? If I'm a holy vessel of God, then my name is holy as well. That's why Yahweh, when you look at the name Yahweh, it's a holy name. And most times people didn't want to speak it or even write it because it was so holy. And so names meant a lot during that time. Think about Gideon. His name was Gideon, but then it turned to Jerubbaal, Baal, which was Baal's contender. And so names meant a lot and impersonated a lot as well. And so when we continue the story, because we got to get to some more of the good stuff here in the wedding, right? Samson has to be born. We need him to be born in this class. So Manoah took a young goat together with grain offering. He sacrificed on a rock to the Lord, and the Lord did an amazing thing while Manoah and his wife watched. As the flame blazed up from the altar toward heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. Who does that remind us of?
The ascension of Christ.
Jesus, ascended into heaven.
Okay, ascension of Jesus. What about Old Testament?
Elijah.
Oh,
Okay, Elijah.
Elijah.
All right. These are all great answers. I'm looking for one other one, though. Okay, the bush. Gideon, right? When he left the offering on the rock, and then the angel touched it, and poof.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but Elijah, Jesus, as well as others. So seeing this, Manoah and his wife fell with their faces to the ground, right? Because now they recognize that, oh my goodness, this really is the angel. And when the angel of the Lord did not show himself again to Manoah and his wife, Manoah realized that it was the angel of the Lord. And so it took the angel to not show himself again, right? It was like, all right, we've been on the ground for at least 5 minutes. I think this is an angel of God. And so watch what happens. We are doomed to die, Manoah says. We have seen God. Now, even though they didn't see God like Yahweh God, they still saw the vessel of God. And for them, seeing the vessel or the angel was the same thing because of its eminence and substance and glory and awesomeness. But notice how his wife answers him, right? He's freaking out. He's like, oh my goodness, we're doomed, we're gonna die. She says, listen, man, listen, if the Lord meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and grain offering from my hands, nor shown us all these things he's now told us. Common sense, right?
Can we assume there was an eye rolling at some point?
Can we assume there was an eye rolling or something? Right? I can actually picture it where they're on the ground. He's like, okay, I think this was an angel of God. We've been here for so long. Oh my goodness, we're doomed. The wife is already standing up and she's just shaking her head, rolling her eyes. Are you serious? If he wanted to kill us, he would have done it a long time ago, right? But he accepted the offering. And so the woman then gave birth to a boy, named him Samson, right? The name wasn't given to her, in the text at least. And he grew and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him while he was in Manasseh, then between Zorah and Esther. And it's interesting here that this is a different kind of activity of the Spirit, because previously we've seen the Spirit like press upon people or cover people, but here we see the Spirit beginning to stir him. Any questions about chapter 13 before we rock and roll into his first marriage?
I think we did it.
All right.
Oh,
So,
quick question.
yes.
Whenever it says that because we have seen God, in the Old Testament prior, anytime that they have seen God, it was always in a
Mhm.
angel form, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Nobody else really saw.
So
There's no
you
description.
had, oh my goodness, was that
Like
Elijah?
Noah.
I'm not sure if Noah specifically saw God.
Moses up on the mountain.
Moses saw him on the mountain, and so when he came back from the mountain, his face was like radiant with radiation and glowing. And then Moses had to turn because God was passing behind him, and if he saw him, he was going to die. And then you had this kind of illustration in Ezekiel, I believe it was, where he kind of talks about this radiant creature where he looked like a man from waist above and was all this other stuff below. And so people have seen these images of God, but I don't think that they truly saw Yahweh himself. And if they did, it probably was more like an angel, something glowing, something radiant, something bright, that sort of thing. All right, so now let's get to this first marriage of Samson, right? Samson, as we talked about, indeed is the last judge. So we've gone through all of these. We've gone through Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, etc., etc. And then these were the three minor judges we didn't even talk about, but it's okay. It's Samson. So we'll move into a part where on this flow chart, we're getting into the worst of the worst, right? We're getting into the worst of the worst. And things are going to get a little bit more interesting and disturbing at the same time. And so we saw the angel visit, and now here we are with Samson, his first feat. And so what happens is this. Samson went down to Timnah, right? He went down to Timnah. So he was in this area here, and he went over into the Philistine part. Scholars believe because he was able to migrate or move so easily, the Philistines weren't fully oppressing them yet. Instead, it was kind of like just the enemies on the other side of the ridge. As long as we don't bother them, they won't bother us. Don't kick the hornet's nest type of thing. And so he says to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as a wife. So demanding, right? I seen the woman. I want her. Make it happen, Dad. Right?
That's the way judges operate.
Yeah, it's the way judges operate. And so, what's wrong with this though?
She's Philistine.
She's Philistine, which they're not supposed to marry foreign wives, right? That's not supposed to happen. Don't commingle with the people. And then what's the other thing that's wrong here? He's telling his dad what to do. Yeah. So even in our culture today, if you're going like the traditional route, typically you would go and talk to the father, or the fathers would talk to each other and try to arrange things, right? That's not my generation. My generation, we just say, oh yeah, let's get married and invite the parents. Yeah, if Chantel and I did that, we would be crucified.
Dad says that.
My granny would come back from the grave. So, his father and mother replied to him, "Isn't there any acceptable women among your relatives or among your people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife?" Right? Why do you have to go to Sam Houston, right? I mean, can't you just anywhere but
You're
Sam
full of
Houston?
it today.
You know, I think that probably is what I'll tell my son if he comes home and says, "Dad, look, I met this girl from Sam Houston. She's so amazing." I'm like, "Oh, that's cute, son. You don't want me to pay for the wedding, right?" But no. So she's Philistine. I bleed purple. I just do. And so Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one for me." Right? How many children say that all the time? "Dad, I'm just gonna marry her mom. She's gonna be the one. I promise you." 5 years later, they're single, right? They've dated 3 other people since that time. The story of my life. And so Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. And as they approached the vineyards of Timnah, some of you know my story. I dated a girl for 6 years when I was in high school. And then when I got to grad school, it ended. So I thought, that was going to be the person I married. And look, God had something better in store for my life. I appreciate you guys. You're good. And so, gosh, this is terrible.
Your wife's not here today.
She's not. She's not. So,
But she can watch.
She will definitely watch. So, let's see here. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines. For at that time, they were ruling over Israel. So again, this could be an editor's note, trying to help us understand the text. But isn't it interesting that he had to marry a foreign wife just to, fight the Philistines? I don't know how I feel about
You
that.
say foreign, but she's also a Gentile, isn't she?
No, she's Philistine.
Yeah, she's Philistine.
Yeah, she's a Gentile.
She's a Gentile.
Gentile.
She wasn't.
That's what I'm saying.
She wasn't circumcised.
She's a Gentile.
Uncircumcised.
Yeah, Gentile and foreign is some of the same things
Yeah.
in Scripture. But she was a Gentile woman. And so Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. Now, I guess they approved. And as they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring toward them. And here the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. So when I first read this, I'm like, all right, the lion part, of course, is amazing. But even just a young goat, right? Just tearing apart a young goat is enough in and of itself. But he actually goes on to tear a whole entire lion. And why is this lion present in the story? Why did it have to be a lion? Why not like a bear?
Well, because what happens later on.
And he tears a young goat with his
And
hands.
what was he doing in a vineyard anyway?
That's a good question. What were you doing in a vineyard anyway? Right?
Are we doing that hard?
Yeah. Son, what were you going to Sam Houston for? So why was he even in the vineyard? And because he's in the vineyard, what happens there? He's in the vineyard. What does this mean? How do we interpret this? He probably touched it, right?
Yeah.
And because he touched it, he probably violated his vow, right? And so what's interesting,
Finally, the doctor said if you protest anything dead,
mhm,
then you're supposed to shave your whole head and start over.
right?
Lies.
Poor Samson.
Dead, but you're talking about dead people, not just dead, because they eat dead people. They eat dead people. They're dead and they eat, so that's no big deal. It's just the fact that he was not supposed to be in there, so you couldn't avoid stepping on a seed or something that had to do with the break.
Mm-hmm.
So, that is so confusing to me, because Jesus drank wine.
Well, he wasn't told not to either.
Right, but notice too the difference between Jesus and John the Baptist. John the Baptist was a Nazarite, and so that's why you see him in a wilderness eating locusts and honey. Locust, something may actually be the creature locust, but it also could be fruit, depending on how you interpret it and
Sounds better than the bug.
what your diet wants to consist of. And so, let's see. They were not to go by any dead body or to eat any unclean animals or things of that nature. And so what we really see in this text is that he breaks his vow. So we learn about the mother and father, and then the very next thing we learn about is Samson wanting to go marry a Gentile, which is bad juju, as they say. And then he goes into a vineyard, a place he should not be going, like Sam Houston. And then he wrestles with this lion. Now, Wiersbe gets interesting sometimes. In all of our studies, you see kind of Wiersbe's reading into the text. You also see him bringing out good information. But he says here on page 132, he says, Samson was living by sight and not by faith. He was controlled by the lust of the eyes rather than by the law of the Lord. And so, because of that, he wanted to marry this Philistine. And so they then go down to Timnah. And then he says on page 133 that this lion is a symbol of God trying to get his attention. So God sends this lion on his path to get his attention. And my pushback to Wiersbe is, if this is God trying to get his attention, then why does God give him the power to destroy that? Because the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and so he was able to rip apart the lion as a young goat. And so if that indeed was God saying, hey, don't go down this route, then why did God give him the power to defeat the messenger, if you will?
Well, then what he messed around with that lion's body.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yep.
He would have missed
I
that.
thought
He would have missed the
he
last of the
took
story.
that honey out
Yeah.
of my body and ate it,
Mm-hmm.
and gave it to his parents, and they ate it.
Yeah.
They didn't know it came from a dead,
Right. This one.
This is the first time that it's sort of been revealed to him that he's a warrior,
Right.
and
Mm-hmm.
God tried to get his attention,
Right.
but he also said, but look, I mean, it's the first time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that could be. It's the same with David, right? When David was going to fight Goliath, he says, listen, okay, all I know how to use is these stones. I don't need a sword. I don't need your armor. Just let me go out there. But he had fought lions and tigers and bears before. And so that kind of is like preparing the story. And so here we see the great warrior. This is some remarkable warrior. Notice nothing is written about his stature. We don't learn that he's a big, brawly guy, right? We don't learn that he's really, really strong like James, can deadlift 700 pounds. We don't learn that. But instead, we see more so that the Spirit of God is that which empowers him to do these things. And so he tears this lion apart, rips him to shreds, and then he goes and talks down to the woman, right? And he liked her. Love at first sight. And sometime later, we don't know if that's like a day, 2 days, a month, 2 years, whatever, but he went back to marry her, and he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, and in it he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. And he scooped out the honey with his hands and ate it as he went along. And when he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they too ate it, but he did not tell them that he had taken it from the lion's carcass.
Why would anybody eat honey from a carcass?
It's wild honey.
From a carcass?
Doesn't matter where it comes from.
Just like a tree.
I thought it came from bees.
The bees made it.
Okay.
It is gonna be. The bees set up their nest right in the carpet.
So how long does it take? That's a good question, good conversation. How long does it take for a lion's carcass to decompose enough for bees to want to inhabit it?
Not very long.
Not very long. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think within a month. I tried to research it and I couldn't find
It takes a
anything.
while for a bee to make any honey, though.
Right. So we're looking at a couple of months here.
Yes.
That's the time frame. Even though it says sometime later, we can tell from the decomposition of the lion and the dwelling of the bees that this was probably a couple of months later. And so there are a few things that I noticed in the text. First off, when he first went to fight the lion, he went down with his father and mother, but they did not stop him from going to the lion. It's like, how were you not aware of it? And then the second time when he goes by, Wiersbe points out something that's really interesting. He says, it's bad enough to disobey God. So he kills the lion, he's in the vineyard, foul, one broken. He kills the lion. He goes back. He reaches into something that's unclean because it's a decomposed, dead animal. And he reaches into it and he grabs some good honey and he starts eating it, right? And then he uses this as a riddle later. And I'll tell you what Wisby says here in a minute. But after he eats the honey, his father went down to see the woman, right? Now his father is operating in that role. And there Samson held a feast, as was customary for young men. And so when the people saw him, they chose 30 men to be his companions, which is like his groomsmen, right? I thought my wedding party was pretty large with 20 people, right? 10 for me, 10 for her, and then a few ring bearers. But he had 30 men. So 30 on one side and 30 on the other. But he says to them, let me tell you a riddle. If you can give me the answer within 7 days of the feast, which was customary at the time, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes, something very, very expensive at the time. And if you can't tell me the answer, then you must give me 30 linen, 30 clothes. They say, tell us your riddle. Let's hear it. He said, okay, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. And for 3 days, they cannot give the answer. So when you first read this, or you first heard this, what came to your mind when he said this? Sin.
Why would he ask that? Why would he
Yeah.
come up with that riddle?
Why would he ask that? Why would he come up with that riddle? I mean, like, really, Samson? Who's going to get this? Right?
It's like he was boasting about it.
Right. He was
Wanted them
boasting.
to find out the answer. Because who
Right.
goes around
That makes
that
sense.
scenario?
Yeah. And that's exactly what Wiersbe says. Wiersbe says on 133, it's bad enough to disobey God, going through the vineyard and then the carcass thing. But when you make a joke out of it, you sunk to a new depth of spiritual insensitivity.
Well, he killed his animal with his bare hands, so he found this, little
Right.
meat thing, but he hides it, so nobody knows about it, he doesn't talk about it to the parents.
Right.
So now it's like, well, wait a minute, if I can't brag about it, what's the point?
Mhm.
So, now he's gotta tell everybody.
Right. And notice he did tell his parents what he did, right? He didn't tell them at all when he ate the honey. He just said, here, have some.
Yeah.
Looks like somebody saying, yeah, never mind, we just have to do some. So, let's see here. So, of course, they don't know anything about this, right? They're like, okay, out of the eat is something to eat. I don't know, is that barbecue? Out of the strong, something sweet, pecans? For 3 days, they could not answer. And so on the fourth day, they said to Samson's wife, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to steal our property? So that's like a big deal, right? Evidently, these 30 garments and linen were a big deal. It's like, hey, you're either going to get us the answer or we're burning all of you off, which is the most excruciating way to die, because your skin is boiling, right? It's not just like a one and done, hey, this woman hit me in the head with a rock, put me to my end type of thing, right? It's like a no, we're going to put you on a stake and burn you. And so we learned just how crazy this is. And they say to her, coax him, right? You know, be sweet to him, be nice, see if the gentle giant can help you. And so Samson's wife then threw herself on him sobbing. You hate me, you don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. Right? So when I was studying this, when I first heard that, you hate me, you don't really love me, that's like typically sometimes what happened, what is said when somebody's trying to get you to do something, right? It's like, you don't really love me. If you did, you'd clean the house a little more, you know? If you did, you'd clean the car a little more, right? It's like a low blow. It's like a really low blow, right? I'm not saying that that's what happens, to me, but
Probably would.
it does. And so then Samson then says to her, right, you've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told the answer. And then, let's see, he responds, I haven't even explained it to my father or mother, so why should I explain it to you? One of the first things I learned in my premarital counseling engagement times is you never find yourself in that great divide between parents and wife. If you do, you probably want to side with your wife, because you're going to have to sleep with her at night, right? You're going to have to go to bed, and you may have to be on the couch. And so here he is, he's like, why would I tell you when I haven't told my parents? So he's putting the parents above his soon-to-be wife.
His wife.
Yeah, his wife. And so it's interesting too, because in this time period, the feast was 7 weeks. So she's kind of considered his wife, quasi his wife. But it's not until the consummation at the end of the 7th day that it's actually official and it's done. And so what happens is, let's see, she cried the whole 7 days of the feast. The whole 7 days she's crying. She's like, he's not telling me anything. My people are going to die. I'm going to get burned. I didn't sign up for this. Why did I marry an Israelite? And so on the 7th day, he finally told her, because she continued to press them, just continued to nag. Tell me. Finally, we break in. That reminds me of the scripture in, I think it's in Matthew, where it talks about prayer. It follows the Lord's Prayer. And it says that surely if somebody were to come to visit a person's house and to knock on the door all night long, they'll eventually give them some bread to eat because they're just tired of hearing them, right? I don't know. I hope that's not how God is for us. It's like, all right, listen, I'm just tired of you praying, so here you go. But here we see some of the same things. It's like, okay, I'm tired of you asking me about it. I'm going to tell you. And so before sunset on the 7th day, so right before he was able to make this thing official, the man of the town said to him, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? And then this is how Samson responds. If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. Woo! Man. Yeah. Women, when y'all hear that, how does that make y'all feel? He says, if you have not plowed with my heifer. That's crazy.
That's why we call men Jack.
Say that again?
No, do not say that.
Please blank that out. We know that.
Oh, man. So there's an association with animals, right? Personality names.
But we really don't hear too much about cows.
Right.
And that's what, I was wondering a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
why are they sacrificing cows? But I figured
Yeah.
that land, that area didn't accommodate them, or, but now.
That's a good question. I'm trying to think back, but I see any cows in the Holy Land. I want to say that I did. You know, yeah, I don't remember specifically. I want to argue that there has to be, but I'm not sure. But that's a great point because
So to them, it might be a really filthy, just animal because it's not constantly around them, but they don't see it.
Right. Because even with Jael, she gave them, I think, goat's milk, because it was, so it wasn't even like cows around. They don't know what's good for them. And so it's when he says the heifer, it is important for us because it's like, okay, well, wait a minute, you're bringing up something that isn't known to the people. And so what Wiersbe says is that this actually is not necessarily an insult, even though we all take it as that. You just call her a heifer. I wonder if that's where we get the word from today. But anyway, he says to her, Wiersbe says, this is a proverb about them breaking the rules. So essentially what they were doing is they were using something outside of the rules to win the game. Right.
Because you never would plow with a heifer anyway.
Right. You never would plow with a heifer anyway. It's almost like going bowling with some friends and you're a pretty good bowler and all of a sudden midway into the 12 frames, I think it is, they put up the bumpers. It's like, wait a minute. You wouldn't have won if you didn't put up the bumpers. You wouldn't have won if you didn't plow with the heifer. But not the same thing. And so what we see is that the Spirit of the Lord then comes upon him powerfully, and he goes down to Ashkelon. There are 5 major city-states or areas for the Philistines. Ashkelon is one. And he struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of everything, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. So he goes to this other place, murders these people, and then takes their clothes, right, off their back and leads them all the way. So he's here in Timnah, and he says, all right, you know what, I'm so mad, I'm going to march all the way through your territory and get one of your major cities, find 30 people, murder them, take their clothes, and then I'll bring it back to you.
And now he's touched dead bodies.
Right.
Yeah.
So now he's touched dead bodies. And it's interesting because the Spirit of the Lord came upon him before he went to go do that.
That's interesting.
And then he gives his wife away.
Yeah.
So why didn't he, when the wife tell him of the threat of the people killing his family,
Mhm.
it seemed like the wife would have told Samson, and Samson would have could have killed those
Right.
people.
Right. That's a good point. So, as readers, we're like, okay, wait a minute. The Spirit of the Lord comes before he goes to what we would consider innocent people, even though they were Gentiles. He goes all the way over here, and the Spirit of the Lord helps him and empowers him to defeat them. But what about the people who were actually his real threat? Like the real people who were threatening him and his wife, who still also was unnamed, just as the mother was. It's interesting. It's something that we wrestle with. Yes, ma'am.
My Bible says, the Spirit of came him, God's purposes for Samson included humbling the Philistines, Ashkelon, one of the 5 major cities of so,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't quite see God doing all this kind of stuff, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of his job, was to humble them.
Right.
Samson was just kind of a creep, you know, a real jerk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He was
For
really
sure.
strong.
Your high pick 30 minutes, so good pretty garbage on.
And then he didn't want her anymore, so he gave her to his friend.
Right. And so it says, as you mentioned, burning with anger. So he's still mad. The man is going all the way down to Ashkelon. He comes all the way back, and he's still mad. He didn't walk it off, right? And so, burning with anger, he returns to his father's home, and Samson's wife was given to one of his companions who had attended him at the feast. And these companions were the Philistines that were given to him. So she married in the family. And so now it is Samson's wife is given away. And this kind of leads him into some other things there. But in this story that we've read so far today, we learn about a different part or a different narrative of Samson than we heard before. Typically, we hear about Samson and Delilah. But now his first love, his first wife, is an unnamed woman from Timnah, who is a town only 10 miles away. We also see and hear of his mother, who was very intricate in the raising of the child, because he was to be a Nazareth from womb unto death, but she's also unnamed. And so as we conclude today, I think that there are 2 things that really came to my mind as some concluding points for us. The first thing is we see just how important parents are to the life of a child. Manoah's question here is some of the same things that parents ask. When a child is born, how am I to raise them? What should I do to make sure that they are living into their calling and that they are going to be disciples of Christ and growing? And then when they get past that point, right, when they're of age to marry, if you will, as with Samson, then what is the role then become of the parents? And so here we see the author and God is reminding us that parenting is indeed a gift from God. And sometimes it really does require holy guidance for children. And the other thing that we see here as well in the story of Samson and Samson's first marriage is that sometimes you have to be careful in misusing the gifts that God has given you. Samson had this unbelievable strength, and because of it, he probably became a little bit prideful. And then the other thing, too, is that I think Wiersbe points out kind of the way that sin works. It began to entice him, began to control him, and then it began to betray him. So in essence, he saw the woman, he was lustful after her. And then because of that lust, it controlled him to want to marry her and break vows. And then at the end of the day, it was her that betrayed her husband in giving the answers to the friends. And so it's a reminder of how we have to be careful, because the devil works from the outside in. The devil gets to our heart because of what's on the outside, because of temptation and lust. One little lie that we tell leads into a stream of lies, and now our heart becomes corrupt. And so I think this is a wonderful story that we've studied so far today. And next week, we'll get into some of the more familiar studies of Samson with how he hid in the cleft of a rock, and his wife Delilah, and what happened there. Yes, sir.
You ever wonder, since he's the last judge for the Israelites, how he judged?
Yeah, that's true, and we'll probably read some of that in the next week to come.
The title is pretty neat, that the light that flickers.
Yeah. I hope that y'all been keeping up with the reading and the commentary, because it really does provide a lot of good detail. And as I was just mentioned, the light that flickered. So it was a light, right? It was there, but the light was kind of going out a little bit. And then in the next chapter, you see the light that failed. And so we start to see where he entertains sin, and he's kind of not really as strong as he should be in the faith and following God. And then next week, you see how it totally goes out. So I hope that you all have enjoyed today's study. Thank you for working with me through the beginning of class. It was a little rough. It was. But I'll close this in prayer, and then we can depart. God, we thank you so much for just your word. We thank you for the mystery of your word. It helps us to continue to search it more and more, because there's something attractive about not having all the facts. And so we just ask that you would give us peace in our searches and enlightenment to our lives. We thank you for this story of Samson, and we thank you for all the characters there. Help us to be mindful of the sin that tries to entice us, of our own temptations, from our own desires. May you protect us from the plans of the evil one, God, and give us the strength to combat them. May you help the light that's inside each and every one of us to not flicker, but to grow stronger, God. And if it's gone out, to be rekindled. We also ask, and we're so grateful, that even though in this story the women were not named, we know that in this room you know every woman by name, God. You know every man by name. And you see us all as your children, equal when it comes to salvation. And so we thank you for the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, his life, burial, and death, and resurrection, which gives us all a hope and a chance of salvation. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.